Really, I think the biggest open source story there was probably the Boston Marathon bombing, but for all the wrong reasons, because of the Reddit community's investigation that identified the wrong people and basically led to people being harassed. What happened then in 2011, obviously, was when the Arab Spring started becoming a really big global issue. We had lots of social media stuff being shared from there, questions about what was authentic and what wasn't. We had kind of fake bloggers, like one of the early ones was Gay Girl in Damascus, which turned out to be, I think, an American man, definitely not in Damascus. So there was lots of confusion about how stuff could be verified. That's kind of where in 2012, I started the Brown Roses blog. Started with very basic stuff, saying, what is this weapon that's being used? Can I identify it? Using open sources to do that. And at that same time, the community was starting to build, not just through the work I was doing, but organisations like Story, for example, that they'd been around for several years doing kind of verification, but because of this new wealth of material, they were finding more material, they were kind of reaching out to me. Then we had people who were interested in arms control, who were interested in this stuff, and they kind of reached out to me and other people. So very early on, this community was being developed of kind of various kind of experts and wonks and amateurs that were coming together and working. Then I think the big story there was probably, for me personally, it was in 2013 where I used rebel YouTube videos to show they'd been receiving weapons that were being smuggled to them by the Saudis, and that ended up on the front page of the New York Times. So that was like a big, impactful story. Then we had this August 21st sound attacks as well, which is also something a huge amount of material was coming from. And because there wasn't much access on the ground for journalists, this was really where a lot of this information was coming from. Then the next kind of third stage of it was the downing of MH17 in 2014. And that's where we had governments making statements that could be checked against open source information. We had criminal investigations, the Joint Investigation Team, for example, using open source material along with other material. We had an increasing amount of interest from all kinds of different bodies. Now, what we're seeing now is kind of the fourth stage, and it kind of started in 2017, and it's now we've got these big international bodies like the International Criminal Court, the Independent, Impartial, and IIIM on Syria. I can never remember which way the I's go, but it's the mechanism set up by the UN General Assembly for basically gathering evidence and case building around the conflict in Syria. And they are taking open source information extremely seriously in their work. I've consulted with both of them on this topic. I'm on the ICC's Technology Advisory Board. In fact, last year in August 2017, the ICC issued an arrest warrant for a commander in Libya based off Facebook videos. So they're seeing this as being very valuable. There are challenges that they face. One thing I'm working on a lot at the moment is the question of how do we collect this content, archive it, and actually turn it into something that's searchable. If we look at the work of the Syrian Archive, for example, they have over 1 million videos preserved from the conflict in Syria. That's all YouTube videos. A small amount is from individuals, but we also have video footage that's been collected by all kinds of news agencies. And what you have is a massive data management task. And this is something that big bodies like the ICC and IIIM are focused on and trying to resolve. Where there's kind of coalitions of organisations now helping these bodies kind of try and answer these questions, because these are questions we've not had to answer. We've never had 1 million videos from a conflict that need to be organised and turned into something that's searchable in a way that's also forensically sound as well. So there's a challenge there about how we archive it, how we access it, who can access it, how it's preserved not just for 5 years, but 25, 30, 40, 50 years as well. So there's all these different questions that need to be answered. But that's kind of the 4 stages I've seen of the development so far.
Could I ask one quick question about process? It seems to me, having followed your work for a while, there's been a development in your process. So now you're working more closely with traditional journalists like Russia Insider, giving you boots on the ground too, and that presumably is a deliberate process on your part. How has that changed in terms of it seems to me like maybe the point of your work at the beginning was that you would publish everything immediately as soon as you got it. Maybe that's changed?
In a sense, we still do. It depends on what kind of investigations we're doing. I think it's partly because we've kind of got a bigger network of organisations that we're working with. It's like with Yemen, we're working with activists on the ground and training them on how to kind of collect evidence in a more useful way that can be then verified, because they have this tendency to have a bit of an American bomb that's being dropped on some civilians, and they take a close-up photograph of it, but we want a kind of far-away shot so we can actually see where it is. So we aren't relying on them to tell us where it is. We can say, okay, we can use satellite imagery to geolocate it. And then when they go and do that work, they can come back to us and we can work on developing projects with them. Some stuff you need to react to very quickly, you need to get something out on the same day just because there's kind of, you know, an interest and a discussion going on. Other stuff is just longer term projects. I mean, some of the stuff we've done on MH17, people have been working on, you know, just individual topics within that for 2 or 3 years. So the other thing with Bellingcat as well is I believe we should give people the room to actually do this work, where it's not like a traditional news organisation where you work on something and move on to the next topic. I say, you know, if you want to work on MH17 for 4 years, there's no problem for me.